Good morning, everyone. What I want to do here today is actually give you the insider's view into healthcare. So particularly as...
Can you talk into this?
Yep, is this better?
Yeah.
Particularly as you're going forward with your blockchain initiatives, and you're looking at healthcare and you're thinking about healthcare to the extent you are, you're looking at it as an industry, you're hearing about it in the press, you're hearing about the problems. It's, I think very critical, very important for you to really have that lens of what are the executives thinking about? What's going through their head day in, day out in this industry? Oh, there we go. Let's see, so just bear with me. There we go, perfect, thank you, thank you. All right. So as we look at the industry today, really, who are the players? Who are we talking about? You've got patients, you've got the government, both as payers and enforcement. You've got commercial entities, vendors, folks in the private sector who are selling to healthcare, to the healthcare market. You've got health plans from the employer aspect, so everyone out there who's providing employee benefits, health plans enters the picture. You've got private payers, Blue Cross, Aetna, Humana, in addition to the government, Medicare, Medicaid. And then, of course, you've got the providers. You've got the hospitals, you've got the health systems, you've got the individual physicians who make up the market. You've also got a highly regulated industry. It is one of the most, if not the most, regulated industries that you're going to ever deal with. And this is just a snapshot and just on the federal side. So it's not even taking into account the state versions. Multiple laws dealing with privacy. Perhaps one of the hottest regulated topics dealing with blockchain right now when you're talking about healthcare. You've got fraud and abuse laws that are critical when you're dealing with commercial arrangements and physicians and hospitals. And they carry very high penalties, both civil and criminal. So you really need to understand the regulatory landscape that you're working in, because if you don't, it can be, frankly, an extinction event for a small company. It could be for a healthcare system. It could disqualify them from participating in federal or state healthcare programs. So it's very serious stuff. Every day, when you're dealing with the healthcare landscape, you tend to hear, you see this in the press a lot, you see it in write-ups, the push, reducing costs, increasing quality, patient access, reducing inefficiencies. These seem like common sense notions, but it really is, it's the daily mantra in healthcare. So when you're looking at solutions, when you're talking to folks in the healthcare space, this is what they're thinking about day in, day out. In addition, every year there's a new layer on top of those daily quality and cost issues. This year of 2018, natural disasters. So you're talking about business continuity, disaster recovery, policy shifts, security issues. Security issues are constantly a huge issue when you get back into the privacy aspect. Opioid addiction. Something you're hearing about politically, something you're reading about all the time in the papers. And again, cost pressures. And these are what are currently the boards of the health systems and the hospitals are looking at as their number one issues that they've got to tackle, in addition to increasing revenue, in addition to patient care, in addition to the quality issues. Let's see. There we go. Now, in addition to all of that, what are the providers actually being told to do and to focus on? So when you boil it all down, use technology and data sharing to improve the relationship, to improve healthcare. Constantly manage the legal and regulatory risks. Constantly don't take your eye off the compliance ball. Invest in patient experience tools. So investment is still key. Investment is very much part of the landscape, but it is, what's the return on investment? It's targeted investment. The patient experience. And I can tell you firsthand, patient experience is something that every day is a constant issue. From a survey standpoint, just how the operations are being run, what is the patient experience. And this gets into issues such as access to your own data. It gets into issues such as how are you interacting with physicians in the hospitals relative to your care. So with all this going on right now in the landscape, then along comes blockchain. And from a hospital standpoint, again, dealing with the executives, dealing with the folks within the hospital system, they're asking themselves, what is blockchain? You know, they hear that it's the next internet, they hear different explanations about it, very technically correct but complex definitions. Simple is better. When you're working with folks in the healthcare space, you're going to be dealing with individuals who are very savvy, particularly when you're working with folks who are the CTOs and folks in the IT space. But when you're dealing with the sort of the non-technical executives, you want to be able to talk about blockchain in a way that's going to be as understandable as possible. Now, one of the aspects that I think folks that I've spoken with in the industry who are really watching blockchain or monitoring it, things that excite them about it really also resonate within the healthcare space. So transparency is huge in healthcare. Trust is huge in healthcare. Being that trusting relationship. From a healthcare standpoint, if you lose trust, you lose everything. Individuals are coming to you, putting their lives in your hands, putting their families' lives in your hands. It's all about the trust aspect. Auditability. Again, going back to the fact that it's a highly regulated industry, compliance. And with that comes audit. So in all facets of hospital operations, they will ultimately be audited. And to the extent that you've got a solution or you've got an offering that can help with that can improve the transparency, that can minimize the risk and the compliance issues, you're going to get a lot of attention. You're going to get people really asking questions and interested on how you can solve those problems. So again, when you're talking with folks on the C-suite and the executive levels and the board, they're very interested in, well, how does blockchain fit across all industries? Where is it on the healthcare standpoint? What makes it special or unique to healthcare? What's the value proposition? And so there's some specific use cases that I think are really critical. And what I've seen, from folks in the blockchain space, what I've seen from folks in the healthcare space, is which of these types of use cases are you focusing on? What's your solution? How are you going to help the hospital? How are you going to help healthcare improve upon one of these areas or any of these areas? So we'll talk a little bit about those. We're just kind of taking one at a time. Online patient access, how individuals are going to manage their own data. This is one that's getting, I think, probably top 2, top 3 focuses on the write-ups. And specifically, it gets back into you as a patient today, when you're working with your hospitals and you're working with different systems, they don't know what's in their medical record. It's not at all unusual for patients to be coming into the physician's offices carrying x-rays, carrying folders, carrying different types of sheets as they go from one doctor's office to another, to another, to another. So from that standpoint, the promise of blockchain having a technology where you as an individual can have your entire collection and history of healthcare data that you can take with you from state to state, from provider to provider, from hospital to hospital, is industry changing. If you've been able to do that in a way that is secure, being able to do it in a way that really gives you control over your data is critical. And to the extent that there's a way to even utilize it in a way that wearables through the Internet of Things, that you're able to actually include that data, which today medical records typically don't have that type of data involved. But if you're able to find a solution that can utilize that, that's industry changing. Electronic health records, which are a variation of that, medical records, you hear all the time about interoperability issues. And as hospitals merge, as they acquire physician practices, that is a constant issue. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. You've got systems that don't talk to each other. I think folks in the hospital space, they're very interested to see how blockchain is going to solve for that. But yet at the same time, they've made huge investments into their electronic medical records, huge investments into their systems. So going to a hospital and talking with them about perhaps changing or doing a course correction is going to be a tough audience because they've already made those financial commitments. But if there's a way to speak to them about how blockchain can integrate with the investments they've already made or can improve upon the situations that they have, then you've got an audience for that. And particularly to the extent that blockchain as a technology is going to improve upon the security proposition. Security is a constant concern, a constant risk. The cybersecurity issues are one of the top 2 concerns that a hospital and healthcare boards have on a regular basis. So if you're able to have a solution through blockchain that can improve upon that, you've got an audience. And those are the folks that are also approving budgets and financial decisions. On the revenue cycle side, when you're dealing with payers, one of the frustrations in the hospital space, both from patients, both in a provider aspect, is the time it takes to go through the revenue cycle, the time it takes to get the claims adjudicated. That aspect, if you're able to structure a solution with an automated claims adjudication feature, if you're able to actually improve upon the speed and improve upon the transparency, again, that's going to resonate because it goes straight to the bottom line. Clinical trials. Clinical trials is an area where just day in, day out, they take a very long time. There's human error involved with the records. There's a tendency for the results to be kept siloed and not shared within the industry. And so the end result is the benefits from a lot of the trials don't happen as quickly or at all. You go back to one of the earlier issues about the goals of improving quality of care. Well, that's an example of how blockchain can do that through the clinical trial process. And a recent example, just to touch on provider licensing and credentialing. Provider licensing and credentialing is a core issue. In the healthcare space, physicians must be licensed in the state. They must be credentialed by the hospital that they're going to perform at. But if you're dealing with telehealth, for example, that becomes an issue because you've got to make sure that the physicians are licensed and credentialed in the different geographies. If you can use blockchain to build upon that and get transparency, and right now Illinois has a project going on with the state of Illinois on this very topic, it's something that's going to find a lot of synergies with telehealth and the more recent technologies that are looking for transparency and looking for flexibility in this space. Healthcare, when we talk about the barriers that you're going to be dealing with and facing, the culture of healthcare, the culture within the hospitals, is it tends to be slow. It tends to be cautious. And so you'll hear folks say hospitals and healthcare are slow to change. It's actually, they're very interested in change. They're very interested in technology. They're very interested in how the latest trends can help them with their mission. But it's not a knee-jerk. There's too much that they have at stake. There are too many issues that tie to the uses of technology. So it's helpful to understand that the culture you're dealing with takes a long time to make decisions. And they've got to gain buy-in with their boards and their C-suites about how the investment in this space is going to help them accomplish their underlying missions. Resources are also an issue on the hospital side. It's a constant issue dealing with implementation of any technology. Prioritization considerations, of course, always rear their heads, but I think one of the key barriers to be mindful of kind of goes back to the highly regulated issues, privacy laws, HIPAA. Folks working in the healthcare space are always hearing about and reading about how this is a great technological improvement, but someone's going to have to solve for the privacy issues. Someone's going to have to solve for the HIPAA requirements, and so it's an aspect when you're dealing with patient consents and you're dealing with authorizations, and some of the laws, not just HIPAA, get very, very nuanced. You've got to not lose sight of that when you're working on the technologies. And wanted to also give a snapshot of the government interest in this space. So what's quite interesting is seeing a lot of the different activities right now, both federal and state, exploring blockchain, working on collaboratives, working on initiatives. It's something where I think clearly at a government level they don't have their head in the sand, And I think that's going to be helpful also when you go back into the regulatory aspect, that if you can get the interest and the synergies in the government focused now in advance, hopefully the solutions on the regulatory side will keep pace with the advancements in technology. And with that, if any questions? Sir?
Where do you think the blockchain community currently stands as it relates to the maturity for the technology for healthcare to actually step up? I know a very highly placed programmer for a health analytics company. He said the technology is nowhere where it needs to be at this point for healthcare to really take this.
From my own perspective, based on, again, coming from the inside, what I'm seeing now is I think it's probably a couple of years. I think it's one where the financial sector certainly is, I think, understandably farther ahead from the technology in that space and the blockchain aspect. I think within healthcare, you look at the work that's been done over the last few years just with implementing electronic, EHRs today, which is, you think back 5 years ago, I mean, it's been a huge change in the industry over the last 5 years. So when you look at that and you look at what blockchain is going to be and do on top of that, I think there's some catching up that has to happen.
Given the slow rate of adoption in healthcare, all right. Given the slow rate of adoption in healthcare, what early use case of blockchain in healthcare do you see, being adopted in the next 1 or 2 years?
That's a good question. I think, to the extent that there are the issues where you've got government collaboration, I think that helps. I think, for example, in Illinois, the work that's being done with the provider licensing as sort of a simple, it's something that you can solve for on an individual state basis. You can roll it out on a broader basis, but I think it's those small steps, those small victories. It's manageable. It's something that you can do that's not dependent upon a system, and it can prove the value and the benefits. And I think with that, it's going to just continue to build upon itself. So I think those sorts of examples are going to be very helpful. I think in the supply chain space is another area that, as you're dealing with the sort of the automated smart contracting, the ability to manage, for example, the supply chain life cycle of pharmaceutical distributions, I think that's an area where you can also get the private sector really working to demonstrate and show the value there that will, I think, help bring the health side of it, the hospital aspect further along. Okay.
Just a comment. For those that are interested in practical applications, we're Intiva Health, INTIVA, and we are implementing a number of these, the main points that he was discussing from the provider side. So if you'd like to know more information, I apologize for the plug, but it sounds like
that's great. That's how you do it.
Work with the area.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yep. Sir?
Are you familiar with MetaBlock and or medical chain? Have you heard of those? And secondly, is there an application to kind of drive this forward that perhaps JCO could get on board with and make a requirement to be JCO?
No, I think that's on the JCO aspect. I think it's going to be the same as with any of the government-sponsored initiatives. I think on the JCO side, if a pilot or a use case is going to show the value of improving from an audit standpoint, for example, then I think that's the type of example that once it's been demonstrated, I could see JCO getting behind because it goes to the purpose of JCO, and it'll just go from there. And the first question you had on just the one example.
Yeah, there's two companies out there, two blockchain startups that are doing some stuff. I know one is MetaBlock and one is the other is Medical Chain. I know Medical Chain just did a demo and they implemented here a week or two ago.
Oh, really? No, I wasn't familiar with it. Yeah. Yeah, love to hear more
Could
about it.
you repeat the question? You said something about MetaBlock and...
Yeah, I was just curious if he was aware of those two projects. I'll say that. Yeah, I was just asking if he was aware of MetaBlock or Medical Chain and their efforts in the space and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I'd like to hear more about it. It's great.
Okay. So we have one more question here.
My question is, does the medical blockchain require a token? And if so, how do you tokenize it or monetize the blockchain?
How do you monetize the token or the blockchain?
Does it require a token? Does the medical blockchain require a token in the first place at some point? And if so, how do you tokenize it or monetize?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I'd love to chat with you a little more after about that.
I was wondering if the blockchain technology can help in the billing process, because it seems like the medical billing is a big problem nowadays.
Oh, absolutely. So in the revenue cycle space, it's something that I think there's a lot of interest in. The private payers have been very focused and vocal about where they think that there's a benefit there, and I think most of them have been pretty proactive in having initiatives on how they can work with the providers to pilot and test how it can improve just the general claims adjudication. So I think, yeah, spot on that. Yeah.
So just a quick question from the patient-centric point of view for tokenization.
Okay.
We're right here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any thought in terms of how to use blockchain from a patient-centric point of view in terms of, you know, incentivizing using blockchain and tokens to incentivize the patients? For example, we're working on a product to help chronic care patients improve their quality of life or lifestyle, and one of the things we're considering using blockchain and tokens in terms of incentivification, both on the patient and doctor side.
I think whenever you're talking about incentivizing, you have to be really careful from a regulatory standpoint, because the question is, what does that mean when you look at the regulations and remuneration? So are the tokens viewed, again, when you talk about incentivize, what is the incentive? Is it financial? Is it compensatory? What is that beyond just the value you get from a healthcare standpoint? So I think, that's the balance that you have to have, different from just a pure private sector company offering something to an individual or a patient. That's one aspect. Very different from getting the providers involved, who are under very strict anti-kickback and Stark-related regulations. So we can talk a little bit more if you've got some specific examples.
Okay, this is one last question.
Yeah.
Way back there. Hold on just a second.
Does that connect to the questions? Basically, my understanding is the use cases you just list there are mostly actually based on private or a blockchain, not public blockchain. So that connect to some of the questions, those token sales and then Ethereum and healthcare blockchain. That's all public blockchain. That how you get into the question, the adoption of blockchain in healthcare industry will be more toward enterprise or private blockchain kind of scenario versus public blockchain. I tend to think the private blockchain is the case for a variety of regulation or the compliance or the issues, not really using a public blockchain. So that's basically right.
Sure. I think it's going to depend upon, again, the segment. So for example, I could see in the supply chain space, when you're dealing with various supply chain companies, whether public or private, outside of the provider space, I think you could see some potential benefits from more of the private approach, private community aspect. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but again, I'm happy to talk with you a little bit more afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.